Freedom Nation, it's Jeff here once again with the Freedom Nation podcast. And on today's show, I've got John Makarewicz on. John is the CEO of a real estate investment company. Had a very long career doing that. And we're going to have some conversations today for those of you that are starting to look at that transition point at some point, possibly selling your businesses or transitioning your career a little bit. We're going to have a conversation of what it takes to be a really successful leader, what it takes to really build a successful team that can run the show for you if you're not there. And that's extraordinarily important if you're ever going to want to sell your business. You cannot sell yourself into slavery. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back on in just 1 second.
All in you. Everything you're looking for, it's all in you. You gotta believe that it's all in you. Everything you're searching for, it's all in.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. John, how are you, my friend?
Jeff, I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be here today.
I am glad to have you on. I've got John Makarewicz on. And John, you're the CEO of what company?
So I'm actually the president of Ferris Capital Partners. That's right. Yeah. So in my prior role, I was CEO of a company called Mark Spain Real Estate. We were a residential real estate company based in Atlanta, Georgia, with offices throughout the Southeast. And my business partner and I, Mark Spain, built that business over about 15 years and had a private equity exit in 2021. Yeah. So it was really an interesting time, because when I first joined with Mark, there was 9 people on the team.
Okay.
And in that time period, there was already this vision of what he wanted to create. And that was a lesson I learned from him very early on in my career. I was, in my early 20s. And it was this idea of just, you never know what the future is going to bring, and you never know, what curveballs are going to come your way. But if you have a clear enough vision and you just keep laser focused on that vision. And so we had a number. We talked about that number.
Okay.
Now we did exceed that number just a little bit. But it was that idea that, when it actually happened, we sort of just willed it into existence, right? Through just perseverance and just never giving up. And it was an awesome experience, a super fun time. I still have some equity in that business. Love that company. But Jeff, for me, what ended up happening is when we actually sold, an interesting thing happened and nothing changed. In other words, I didn't feel any different.
Yeah.
And I'm largely a pretty happy guy, always generally very optimistic. But I sort of expected when that check hit the bank account, so to speak, that I just would go, oh, this huge weight's lifted and everything's changed.
Yep.
And that's not the case, man. And I got bad news for a lot of you out there, right? It's not what you might think it is. And look, I'm very thankful.
And I think I come from the, same thing. I exited from a wealth management practice that I had built, and exact same thing. I remember the day. It was kind of funny because it was my partner wanted to buy me out.
Mm-hmm.
And, at the beginning, it was like, well, who do you think you are trying to buy me out and get me out of the business? And, I came to the realization later that I do need to write a book, how to piss your partner off enough to get him to buy you out of a business. But, it was just kind of that same thing. I'm like, okay, it happened. Now what? What's next? And I'm sure you kind of had that same moment too.
That's exactly right. And really, it was the first time in my life that I think I could actually describe the feeling as like a mild form of depression.
Yeah.
And it took me like 6 months to 9 months to figure out what was going on. And what I realized is that I like building things. I like growing things. I like solving problems. And it's not to say the business wasn't growing or didn't have problems to solve, but things changed. And all of a sudden we were institutional, and it was all about doing more of what we've already been doing. And, I was kind of in conversation with, my business partner at the time. And, we came to a decision that it was my time to leave, and I'm just so thankful for it because, that was really in that period of time. I actually, it's funny, I had planned to take the whole year off 2023 because it was a lot. It was like sprinting a marathon, right?
Yep.
Building a business to sell. And so, I was tired. And, what happened, Jeff, is, I went on a hike just about every day in North Georgia. I love that anyway. It's kind of something I like to do. So literally every single day I'd wake up and drive into the North Georgia mountains and pick a different trail and go for a hike. So after about a month of that, I was like, okay, like
Okay,
this
this
is kind
sucks.
of like enough's enough. And so my current business partner, Mark Ferris, and I had been friends for about 6 years.
Okay.
We had actually connected because he was in Canada with a very similar business to the one I was running in the United States.
Got it.
And so, we just developed a friendship, largely around, just talking through what was working for us, maybe challenges. And so when I shared with him I had left, it was one of those serendipitous things where the next day I got a text message, hey, I got an idea I want to run past you. And so never interviewed, the only time I had to build a resume actually in my whole career was my first job. And then when Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the two big lenders, they require a resume when you apply for a loan. So I was like, okay, I guess I got to actually create a resume now. So, Mark and I this is Mark Ferris now, we spent about a month and a half just talking, and we went to a couple conferences together. I wanted to make sure I was making the right decision. And, I'd spent my whole career in real estate. So what I do now is still related to real estate. So Ferris Capital Partners acquires, underutilized or undermanaged, typically 80s, 90s, or early 2000s apartment buildings. We target 100 units plus. And then we do a value add strategy where we force appreciation through strategic renovations on the property and, operational efficiency as well. We raise capital from investors to do these deals with the goal of doubling their equity in a 5-year hold period. So it's been a lot of fun because it took me back to what I love, which is, the startup. Like every day is a little bit different. You're constantly getting thrown curveballs, and it was that realization. That's where I like to be. That's actually where I like to live. Because, you and I were sort of talking pre-recording, and, I know enough about myself that if I'm not challenged, then I can default to laziness. It's just in my nature. And I know that about myself. So without constant challenge, then I start to, maybe it's sadness. Maybe I just start to like not produce as much. Maybe. So, it's like they say, if you want something done, give it to somebody who's very busy. So I just like to stay real busy. And so this has provided that opportunity. And a lot of what we learned on the residential side and why we were able to exit with a 9x multiple is because we focus so much attention on the client experience. And in residential real estate, that is sometimes missing, right? There's a lot of part-timers and people that kind of get into the business and, maybe they're, working a full-time job, or, maybe they view it as like a side hustle or maybe even a get rich quick kind of scheme. And residential real estate is brutal. It's very difficult.
Well, I've got really good friends that have been, successful realtors for a long period of time. And it's just a grind.
Oh my gosh.
And I always love, during the kind of downturn here over the last couple of years in residential real estate a little bit, and I'm talking to my friend. We talk every week. It's just one of those we built that relationship, and I laugh because I'm like, I don't ever hear Richard being any less busy.
No,
it's the same thing with me. I would talk to financial advisors, and they're like, "Oh man, summers are so slow," and I'm like, I don't ever get slow. I just keep. I don't just goof off. I keep working, and that's my opportunity maybe to create more content, maybe to write another book or something like that when clients are off doing their thing. But I don't ever get slow when it comes to that. So
that's it.
So it sounds like, you're the same thing with you. Hey, I just got to keep going and stuff like that.
That's right.
What was that, because you effectively got your exit relatively early in life. This is a kind of the restart up again. What did you learn the first time that you wouldn't do this time?
Yeah, great question. So, one of the biggest mistakes I made early on in my leadership, was not focusing enough attention on getting the right players on the team, so to speak, right? Getting those right people. But the bigger mistake was I wasn't inspecting what I expected. In other words, you give clear direction, you just assume people are going to have the same motivation you are and going to show up every day. So one thing I would definitely, and we are doing differently here is we put all our pressure right out of the gate on hiring the right people from the start. Now we learned that at Mark Spain Real Estate, but it took us a number of years, right? I always say, in any startup, in any new venture, really in anything in life, you pay what we call the stupid tax, right?
Yeah.
Which is the stuff you just don't know until you're met with that problem. And, I'm a big reader, as you can probably see behind me. Every one of these books I've read, there's a whole other bookshelf on the other side here. Average about 40 books a year, but, you can't learn everything from reading, right?
No.
You got to sometimes learn those lessons the hard way, which is through life. And so, it was that idea. We were young, we were just getting going. And so we were looking for what we would call emerging talent, which what we were really saying is less expensive talent. And so Mark Spain actually had developed a pretty good relationship with Gary Keller. I know you're in Austin, so Gary Keller there is kind of a well known in that market. He formed Keller Williams, and we attended an event he taught. Now Mark was also in his top 10 and top 100 agent group, but all he talked about was the team, hiring the right people. And if you do it right, all you got to do is hire 2 or 3 people, and then everything else takes care of itself. And I'm simplifying that a little bit because obviously it requires work. But when we really started thinking about that, what we realized is that we were hiring the wrong kind of person. And, I was actually listening to a podcast you did recently there with Isabella Fortin. And she was, somehow the conversation kind of circled around to, that idea, you take your best salesperson and turn them into a sales manager, right? And we were doing that all day long, right? We were just doing that, right? And so what we learned
you're a great
is that,
salesperson. You'll be an awesome manager.
Yeah. I mean, frankly, I would say your best salesperson is probably your worst manager, right? I mean, you can't paint a broad stroke, but definitely think, slow down, right, and think that through. And so, what we learned is that our business was fundamentally different from other residential real estate companies, and here's why: we did all of the marketing to drive the leads and business to the company, and then we built out an inside sales team. So this was one of the best things we ever did. So if you run a sales organization and you don't have somebody inbounding those leads, sorting those leads, and then getting them to the right sales rep, you're burning money. You're losing opportunities.
Absolutely.
And so we built out an inside sales team. And so what ended up happening is all of a sudden we realized we're really like a marketing, like account management business more so than a sales organization, right? I mean, obviously we have to sell, but these people are calling us saying, I want to list my home. And what would happen is we would give those leads to agents, and some of your agents were diligent and on the ball, and they'd have 60% conversions. Others had 20. And so you're like, what's the difference here? And we realized some of it just came down to that speed to lead. Like we were just waiting too long to call the people. The follow-up wasn't there. So we built out this incredible inside sales team, and that made all the difference. And so what got clear is that we were hiring salespeople, or maybe even worse, brokers at other residential real estate companies who, if you actually look at their business model, the average residential real estate, sort of your Remax, Keller Williams, and I'm not disparaging these, it's just different. Their business model is actually agent count. So they make money by having agents within the company paying monthly fees and giving them a split of commission. Our business model was completely contingent on our ability to convert leads. And so what we realized, and this was sort of the breakthrough, is we need to go hire sales managers from corporate sales who are used to leads, lead accountability, sales, and I can go teach a real estate. So we did find a couple little honey holes, which would say, for example, be new home sales. So we would hire folks from there. But gosh, we had people from Delta, people from Verizon, people from all over corporate America. And then we focused very heavily on a just awesome culture, right? And, how do we make this place, just really great? So one of the things I'm almost more proud of than anything is that we were consistently ranked one of the best places to work by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
That's awesome.
Now they only do employees. A lot of our folks were independent contractors. So we would have loved to have gotten in our other markets, but because all of our employees were in Atlanta, we would win it there. And that gave me more charge and more energy than, hitting a sales record or being the number one team, because it just showed that, like, when you take really great care of people, it's that Costco philosophy. Hire great people, take great care of them. They'll take care of the customer, and then the customer takes care of the bottom line.
But and what you said earlier too, I mean, your business was really revolved around the customer experience.
That's right.
Which most realtors, I mean, I think so many realtors think, okay, I'm probably only, it's like the wedding industry. Okay, we're really only going to ever deal with you one time. I think the most successful realtors I have are the ones that just will go over and above the call of duty. And then, 3 or 4 years later, there's hey, I want to move across town, or, hey, I got a new job. I need to sell my house. So you worked hard to get that first sale, but then you get those the pile on ones that happen after that
That's it.
that you
That's
didn't
right.
have to work at all for, and you didn't have to spend money on leads for.
Well, it's a multiplier effect,
Yeah,
right? Because every time you get a referral and you're effectively lowering your client acquisition costs, right? It's free
absolutely.
business.
Yeah,
So yeah, we apply that same thought process and principles here at Ferris Capital
cool.
Partners. And how that looks is the resident,
Mm,
and so we think a lot about how do we make this such an exceptional living experience for the resident that they're going to be happy to pay their rent. They're going to be okay with that rental increase because they see we've added value, not
mm.
just in maybe a nicer unit, but we've added amenities. It's interesting, Jeff. We're circling a deal right now, and one of the primary reasons I love it is because it has terrible reviews. And if you look at the reviews, you can literally pinpoint the moment in time they change property management companies, and everybody is specifically calling out the company or that literally the person's name, the property manager, by
Yeah.
name. And it blew my mind because I'm sitting here going, I get copied on every resident review that we receive. Now,
Okay.
this is another little tip I tell leaders, like within your company, you should be surveying your clients regularly, whatever you're selling. I would say certainly just after onboarding occurs, how does the
Mm,
onboarding experience go? Because if you get that wrong, you're going to have more churn than you can, handle.
mm.
And then if there's a closing or sort of an end of the transaction, right? Obviously, there's another opportunity there. So, for example, at Mark Spain Real Estate, we would survey our listing sellers like 5 to 6 times throughout the transaction, because
Interesting.
there were times if we hadn't gone under contract at 30 days, we did a survey at 90 days. But I share that because I always receive those. And so when an agent got good feedback, I would personally reach out to them and say, great job. Thanks for
Nice.
honoring these values or these fundamentals within our company. Often the review would reference something that I could say, this ties back to our value. Thank
Mm.
you so much for honoring that. But we do the same here at Ferris Capital Partners, but it's with the
Okay.
residents. And so I'm thinking to myself, either the operator doesn't care, which is terrible, or they're not paying attention, which might even be worse.
Yeah.
And this person is absolutely lowering the value of their deal because, as you know, commercial real estate, especially 4 units or higher in multifamily, trade on the income approach.
Yeah.
So, your income's been affected by this bad property management. And
And
now
you're not
you're
even
probably
paying
selling this.
attention to it, apparently. Yeah.
I mean, this deal might have sold for a couple $1,000,000 less than it could have had they just managed it better. So I love that because I get to come in and clean that up. And so, I mentioned hiring being a very big focus for us. So we use third-party property managers.
Mm.
We're not large enough at this point to have our own in-house property management, but we hire the property managers who work on our site and then give them to the third party to run their process. So we have all the control around who's sitting in that building, because you could take the best vendor on planet Earth, but if the salesperson or the person you're working with is terrible, you're going to get terrible results, right? So yeah, that big focus around people, I would say, is the number one lesson I learned. And Jeff, candidly, naturally, I'm not super empathetic. I'm pretty low emotion, generally
Mm.
speaking. I don't have really super high highs or super low lows. I'm
Yeah.
pretty even keeled, generally speaking. My friends might tell you I'm a little hyper. I move quick and I think fast and all that. But if you see me hot, it's usually for about a minute, and then I'm like, all right, what are we going to do about it? I can get into that kind
Yeah.
of mode quickly. But naturally, what that means, since I'm not high emotion, I'm not really a big giver of that, right? And so over the years, I had some great mentors and coaches. And one of the things that worked really well for me, actually, which a lot of people think is kind of interesting or different, but I mentioned I read a lot. I read a lot of fiction.
Okay.
As well as
Interesting.
leadership books
Yeah.
and biographies, business leadership books, things of that nature. But what the fiction has been able to provide me is lived experiences different from my own.
Mm.
And so having that vision now, I may, sometimes I have to watch it candidly, because I do think of the people first, where I used to be a little more task oriented. So, leadership is a learned skill, as we know, right? And so I developed that empathy, through a couple of different ways, but one of them being reading really great fiction. And, I use this example because a lot of people have seen the movie, but The Shining, right? Stephen
Yeah.
King's book, The Shining, is not about a haunted hotel. It's about a man struggling with alcoholism.
Hmm.
And so in that context, I've had family that have had issues with alcohol. And literally that book gave me some tools that I could use to have conversations with those people, those tough conversations around this thing that was impacting not only them, but everybody around them.
That's awesome.
And so those tools are invaluable to me. So
Yeah.
really, once I got clear on, it's not only getting the right people, but then my job as the leader is to give them everything they need to be successful, and then frankly, get out of their way and let them do the work. check in regularly, make sure that they're, moving the needle on their metrics and their KPIs. This isn't a kumbaya around the campfire thing. But when everybody knows, when they check in with me on their weekly same page meeting, I'm going to ask the same questions in the same format in the first 10 minutes. And we're going to get through that. And then the rest of the hour is theirs. What do you need from me? What are you working on? What challenges are you experiencing? And then you build a culture where, if somebody has something personally going on, they're comfortable bringing that to you,
Yeah.
because let's face it, we're human beings and nobody can turn that off. I mean, yes, some people are better at compartmentalizing, but if somebody's going through a challenge with their spouse or their child or whatever, it's going to spill over into the workplace.
Yeah.
So if you can be a resource for them, look, I'm not a psychiatrist, but if I could at least point them in the right direction, or just even be
someone
a
that can listen to them. A
That's
lot
right.
of times it's just like, I just need somebody to listen to me outside of my family and my friends and everything else. And
That's right. That's right.
and as a boss, be able to say, hey, I understand, I totally get it. Still have to do our job, but I
right.
understand where you're coming from at this point. So,
well, and sometimes, it's that idea, of me being the one to say, hey, maybe it'd be good for you to just to take tomorrow off and just decompress and think through some things. And then you'll come back, on, 2 days stronger, right. And more focused. So, it's just having that empathy and understanding that, we're all going through things and understanding that. Right. So one of the things I tell our sales team at Ferris Capital at Mark Spain Real Estate is that, when a client's, maybe raising their voice or they're upset about something, I can almost guarantee you it's not you they're mad at.
No.
Right. So just listen, apologize, offer a solution, and just be there, right. To support. So right now, interestingly enough, we raise a lot of our capital from Canadian investors.
Okay.
And
interesting.
so there's some stuff going on between the US and Canada, to put it mildly. Right. And so very quickly, they started hearing feedback from Canadians saying, I'm not interested in doing business in the US. And so what we learned and what we taught the salespeople, like in the moment, was, well, you're not going to change their emotions or feelings around this. So there's no sense in even arguing with them about it. Just listen, acknowledge it, and then share with them how we think about it. And this is how, understanding that you feel this way and you're not wrong to feel that way. Here's how we're thinking about it. And generally the conversation opens back up and people are willing to listen. Right. Yeah. And so, it's just a big piece that I teach anybody who asks me, right, about leadership. A lot of it is in those soft skills, your ability to help and understand people and, provide them with solutions to whatever may be challenging them.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, cool. Let's transition to the fast 5 questions then.
Awesome.
All right. So first question, you wake up in the morning, business is gone. You have $500 in your pocket, laptop, computer, place to live. What are you going to do first?
Yeah. So for me, I'm naturally, I've spent most of my career in sales and in sales oriented organizations. So in that context, I would get back into selling real estate. That's 100% what I would do. With $500, I could absolutely generate 1 or 2 listings that in 3 to 4 months would generate, 30 to 40,000 in income. My strategy around that, it's interesting. Podcasts, right? I would say podcasts are absolutely the new media, right? But, podcasts are something, it takes time. So I wouldn't launch a podcast. What I would do is launch a webinar series on my social media with a very small spend, just giving people tools and tips on what they need to be thinking about. Right now, residential real estate, it's a challenge, right? Because ultimately, if you have a 3% interest rate and you have to move, because the only people moving right now have to, it's not largely a choice that they're making. And so it's a job transfer, it's a change in their situation. Selling a home is one of the top 5 stressors in life, alongside divorce, death, illness, et cetera. And so, building out a webinar that would help people understand, the pain points and the struggles and the challenges they're going through, and here's some solutions to those things. And then I just pick up the phone and call every friend and family member in my phone and just, ask them, who do you know that might be interested in selling? It's what I know. It's how I started in my career. So that's where I would gravitate. Because I do think that one beautiful thing about real estate is, you said it, man, it's like it's a grind. It's not easy. And if you think just because you got your license, people are going to call you, they're not.
No.
And so, what other industry can you get into where you can literally just pick up the phone and call people and potentially get some business, And so that's the approach I would take, because it's something I know, and I have no doubt that I could get things moving pretty quickly if I had to go back to square one.
I love it. Love it.
Yeah.
What's the biggest business mistake you've ever made?
I kind of touched on this earlier, but there was this interesting moment. So when I joined up with Mark Spain originally, I was hired as a salesperson. So I was
Okay.
just a support role salesperson. But within about 6, 9 months, he came to me and said, look, we only have one buyer agent, which in a typical real estate team, you may have 1 or 2 listing agents and 4 or 5 buyer agents. So
Okay.
he had like 4 or 5 listing agents and one buyer agent. And so he recognized that we're missing opportunity because a lot of these sellers have to buy.
Hmm.
And so he said, if you can scale up the buyer team, I'm going to let you manage it, own it. Here's my expectations. We need systems and process. We're not rushing into this, but you build out a plan and, I'll kiss it. And if I like the plan, you can go to the races. And so my leadership sort of came in phases where over time I was just given more responsibility. So fast forward a few years, I was director of operations, but Mark was given an opportunity with another company.
Okay.
And, he decided to take on that opportunity. So he left me in charge. Now, we talked about this a lot over the years because ultimately it all ended well. He took his ownership and I took my ownership, but I just candidly didn't know 100% what I needed to do. His ownership was he wasn't sharing the financials with me, so I didn't understand how the company was really functioning.
Mm-hmm.
But what was happening is I was telling people what my expectations were, but I wasn't going behind them to check.
Yeah.
And we had an account that was quite valuable to the company. And we had a very talented person running that. In fact, that person just left the company recently. He's a close friend of mine. And I would go by his office 2 or 3 times a day. What do you need help with? What do you need help with? I got it. And I just said, okay, you got it. Well, guess what? Mark kind of starts sniffing around and realizes we're way behind. And that was a big miss on my part. And Jeff, candidly, he fired me. And in that meeting, I sat down and I said, Mark, I'm not accepting that. And here's why. And we talked for about an hour and a half. And I just said, look, give me 1 week and I will get this back on track. And without pointing fingers or casting blame, I took extreme ownership, but I said, here's what I need. I need to see the financials.
Yeah.
You and I need to have a weekly check-in. If you see something, come to me. I'll handle it. I'm going to do the same. And our relationship grew so much in that moment. The trust grew so much in that moment. I convinced them to give me that week. We got that department back on track. And so that lesson was very clear to me at that moment that, you have to know your numbers. You have to know everything that's going on with your business. So in a day like today, fast forward 15 years, every morning I wake up, I review every single dashboard. I see what everybody's productivity looked like. We instituted huddles at Mark Spain Real Estate. We do those today. So every day, everybody's reporting on some good news or an update from the previous day's activity, their number one metric, and the number one thing they have to do that day. And those items all have to relate to your quarterly priority. So if you come in and say, well, I have to check in, follow up with a bunch of emails. No, that's not acceptable. What are you doing to move your quarterly priority? And so just by instituting some of those simple things, it completely transformed my leadership and it became more proactive versus reactive because I could see the numbers. Like all of a sudden, Charlotte, why is their conversions dipping? I call the director of sales. Turns out we just lost the top performer. So now I can put some resources into our talent acquisition department to make sure we fill that hole. We might need to hire 3 agents to fill the gap of that one top performer, but that's what we're going to do. And so that proactiveness was what I learned in that experience. So going into the new business relationship, before I even accepted, my current business partner and I probably spent 100 hours in conversation talking about his management style, his expectations, my management style, my expectations, how I like to lead. And then before we even opened on day one, we spent probably a full day. Well, we did a full day in a conference room developing our vision for the business. This is another tip. It's actually a book called Vivid Vision. I can't remember the author's name right now, but you can find it very easily on Amazon. It's a very short, probably 100-page book. But the bottom line and the premise is go 3 years into the future and write like an 8 to 10 page document, very detailed. What does this company look like? And so you're writing it in the future tense. So you're saying on this day, this is what this company looks like. And so on a quarterly basis, as a team, we read that document cover to cover. It's broken down by department. So each department head reads their department section. And what's amazing is we've been in it for a year and a half now, and like more than half the stuff is already checked off the list because we're just like drilling it down.
Well, because it's kind of the same approach as like the 12-week year, or even somewhat of the one thing.
That's
It's
right.
the same
Yeah.
thing, where it's like, okay, we're going to focus on this. We're going to focus on this shorter period of time. And we're not going to say, oh, well, we have these, year-long goals. We have quarterly goals that are packed into, or a year-long goal that's packed into a quarter, and you just keep
Hmm.
that, activity up. Because if you
Yeah.
don't, it just, you find yourself getting behind. And then it's like, oh, well, we're not going to make that goal for this year.
That's
Well,
right.
no, that you shouldn't have that excuse. So,
That's exactly right. And then I guess to add to that is just keep it real simple.
mm,
2 or 3 priorities, maybe 1 to 2 priorities per person per
yeah.
quarter. We're not trying to like move mountains here. It's small incremental steps on a daily basis. I like to think about Darren Hardy's, like his book Compound Effect, that
Yep.
1% improvement. But you can also think about it in terms of that steps towards your annual and your 3-year and your 5 and your 10-year BHAG. It's just a little bit
Mm,
every single day makes a big difference
yep.
over time. So definitely that. But I would say that was it, man. It was just realizing that, yes, you have to trust, but you have to verify, as Ronald Reagan
Absolutely.
said. That's right.
Absolutely. Well, you already jumped ahead and gave us the book. So is there any other book that you'd recommend
Yeah.
on top of that?
Yeah. Actually, it's funny because I had thought of a different book. So for me, I've read a lot of leadership books, and I would
Yeah.
say when I read John Wooden on leadership,
Yep.
I realized it all started there, man. Now there's
Yeah.
probably people before him, but that book just absolutely blew my mind. It's just, gosh, I mean, it's like a handbook on leadership. It
Mhm.
truly is, and some of the big takeaways for me is the small details matter. If
Mhm.
you've read the book, I mean, he literally would spend, so when a student would show up for day 1 of practice at UCLA, they would literally spend like a day just on how to put your socks
Yep.
on and how to properly tie your shoes.
One of
Now,
my favorite things
yeah,
out of from the John Wooden story is just
yeah,
that. Okay, you're
that's
going to
right.
learn how to put your socks on. Well, I've been doing that for 18 years. Yeah, but you don't do it right.
That's right. And this was a time where they didn't have elastic in their,
Nope.
socks, and they didn't have, they're wearing Converse, right?
Yeah.
And so he's like, you don't put your sock on the right way, you get a blister,
Yep.
and now all of a sudden we lose
And
the
then,
game.
yeah,
Winning
then you're
shot.
useless to me for a week until
Yeah.
you get there.
That's
So,
right. So those small details, that was something that really jumped out to me. His definition of success, which you can look up, but that idea that, it's really that self-satisfaction that comes with knowing that every day you showed up and did your absolute best,
Mhm.
whether you won or lost, right? And I
Yeah.
think that, nobody wins every time. And so big focus on teamwork, big focus on building the right team, and then a huge emphasis on character.
Mm.
And that's something I've absolutely learned. And, we leverage behavioral assessments and personality assessments in our hiring process. And I've learned there's something like too much ambition, right?
Mhm.
Some people are so ambitious they'll cut your throat to get ahead,
Yeah.
right? And so finding the right balance of the behaviors that not only the role demands but the company culture believes in, right? And
Mhm.
so hiring is something we put a lot of focused attention on. But I would say John Wooden on leadership is the book that any
Love it.
leader, if you're 15 years old or you're 50 years old, you should be
I
reading that
can't
book.
remember if it was because I was looking at your website, your personal website today,
Yeah,
or something else, but that book came up today,
yeah,
and I'm
yeah.
like, okay, this is just weird. It's one of those moments. It may have been it was one of your suggested books on your
I think
website.
it was. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
but I
I
was
haven't.
like, as soon as you said that, I'm like, God, I just saw that earlier today. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah. Well, if you haven't read in a while, I do joke a little bit here because I have a lot of friends that they like to read, but what they're
Yeah.
saying is they like to listen to Audible. It's not on Audible, so
Yep.
you're going to have to actually get the book. But it's one that I've dog-eared probably
Yep.
like 35-40% of the pages on,
Yeah.
and highlighted.
It's
the
funny,
heck out of it.
yeah. It pains me to say this, but in anticipation of an eventual move, I
Mhm.
started selling off my library. But
Yeah,
the difference is I now pretty much buy everything on Kindle.
yeah, yeah,
Because I'm like, you know what? I can in my iPad, I can take that with me anywhere in the world.
yeah.
And I have my full library there. So I'm rebuying a lot of those books that I'm selling on Audible or on Kindle.
And Kindle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just for that purpose. But yeah, I mean, I have the same. I used to
Yeah.
have behind me that same thing, but it's gone
Well,
away. So.
when we moved into this house, it was about 12 years ago, and we had movers, but we packed ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I just got these big boxes and dumped all my books in, and the movers showed up and they're like, "Dude, what are you thinking?" And
Yeah.
they gave me like 100 small boxes and like, "You got to repack all this stuff.
Yeah.
We're not lifting that." You don't really realize how much like 50 books weigh, but it's a
Yeah,
lot.
it's a lot. It's an amazing amount. Well,
Yeah.
and so my wife threatened me this. She's like, okay, next time we move, you're moving the whole thing yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm now 10 years older than I was the last time we did this.
Yeah.
I
So
don't think
not
so.
happening.
Yeah.
Not happening. That's right. But yeah, I think whether it's Audible or whatever, I don't
Yeah.
disparage Audible. I
No.
just, for me, I like the tactile. I do
Yeah.
have some things on Kindle, but it's just something about it. Just, I find pleasure in holding a book and the way
Yeah.
they smell and going to Barnes and Nobles and browsing around. And
Yeah.
it's just a pleasure for me.
I'm with
But
you.
yeah, I would say that book you have to read
Yeah,
100%.
absolutely. It's up there in like the top 20, I would
I would
say,
say so.
of books
Yeah,
out there.
that's right.
Okay. What's a tool you use in your business every day that you might recommend?
So there's two I thought of. The first one I'm going to say is screen time on your iPhone. If you have an
Okay.
iPhone,
Yep.
limit the things that you shouldn't be doing. So for example, I went from probably looking at Instagram too much to not even looking at it at all because I just limited how much time every day I could
Yeah.
look at it. And I started with 30 minutes and I thought 30 minutes, that's plenty.
Yeah.
And then you realize by like 11 a.m. I was already at 30 minutes and I'm like, what is that about? Like 30 minutes out of a full day?
Yeah.
Like if you really start thinking about that, how that compounds over time, it's just unbelievable amount of wasted time. And thankfully, I think what also happened is the politics thing on social media got so out of control
Yep.
that I was realizing I was not better after picking it up. I was actually upset or frustrated or angry, or a friend of high school would say something so insane that it made me think different about them. And so I'm just like, I'm just going to put it down. So I'm effectively off social media. I do get on LinkedIn occasionally. If you see me on Instagram, it's usually a picture of my kids, or something like that. And that's for grandma and, grandpa, or my parents, but my kids, grandparents.
Yeah.
But that's really it, man. So I think screen time, making sure that you're really being focused on where you're spending your time. But, the honest answer I would say is candidly ChatGPT. I would say if you're not learning how to leverage that tool, don't let it do the work for you, but help you move quicker through your work. I have found it to be an incredible resource for idea generation, where I go in with 3 or 4 ideas and I craft this really, 600, 800 word prompt. So you have to spend a lot of time on that component. But if you put the right input in, some of the stuff you get out is fantastic.
Oh, it's amazing.
And so
yeah.
I have a friend who's a music instructor and he does really well. He's in demand and he works with like super high end jazz drumming, like legends. I mean, so he's not like just a guy teaching like kids lessons, although he does that too. But he just wrote a book and I'm like, dude, let me send you a prompt. Put this into ChatGPT and then it'll tell you exactly what you need to do to market this book. And he's like, oh my God, this was like a masterclass in marketing in 5 minutes, And so ChatGPT is a tool. Like I have the app on my computer and I'm probably using it 3-4 times a day just to help move things along more quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's
big
a major
believer in
part of my business every day. I mean, I don't know what I wouldn't do without. I mean, I do it with a much smaller team than I had in my previous business,
That's
and we generate more revenue and less management hassle on my part. So
Yeah. And,
it can be better.
there's some concern, is AI an existential threat? I mean, maybe, look, I think people probably said the same thing about the internet and the car and everything else that's ever been invented. It's a change and change is scary for people. But, if you look at what's happening around the world, populations are shrinking. So, there is an argument that could be made that maybe AI is right on time,
It's coming in. Yeah. When we have less and less people and we had that baby boom generation that's now retiring and going away.
That's right.
We don't have as many people to do all these jobs and everything like that.
That's
so,
exactly right. So
I think probably my favorite when it came to that is it an existential threat and everything else was Tucker Carlson interviewing Elon Musk. And it was that Tucker's last interview on Fox before he left and kind of did his own thing. And he's talking to Elon and he said, well, what is this an existential threat? You're a really smart guy. And he goes, I honestly think of AI, it kind of gets amused by us. It's kind of, for us, AI is like a television, or for AI, we're like a television show that amuses it and keeps it interested in everything else. Why would you kill off your favorite TV show? It doesn't make any sense to me, And so it was funny to hear that from like the smartest guy on the planet,
Yeah, no doubt. Look, I mean, you said it earlier about your company, but very similarly, we have a 9-person team that I would say is probably doing the work of 50 people now. They're highly talented and skilled, so that's
absolutely
number one. But they leverage these tools and just their efficiency and effectiveness.
Yeah, well, you were explaining before we got on. If you want to, just really quick, you were talking about how you're using it like to craft a deal.
Yeah, yeah. So what we'll do is we'll basically take, demographic reports about the specific submarket the deal's in, the offering memorandum, and then we include even the financials from the current operator and all that data. And I have a chat that I've spent a lot of time crafting kind of the
Mm.
prompts on to make sure. And so basically, I input that information in, and it's basically like a sniff test. Is this a deal that we should consider?
Yeah.
And now I know the submarkets. We specialize in key markets. So Atlanta, Georgia, where I live, Charleston, South Carolina, where it's 4.5 hours away. Probably
Yeah.
spent half of my college there. I had friends at College of Charleston. It's a market that I vacation in, and then Tampa, Florida. Now my business partner Mark Ferris is in Florida, so
Okay.
we know these markets really well. So I can see a city and know pretty much what's happening, right? And because we specialize in those areas, we're not buying assets in the United States. We're buying in those three
Mm.
markets. But that ability to quickly just sort of should you spend time on this or not,
Yeah.
and that's huge. And then if we think it is a check, then I can then take that output and then spend about 2 or 3 hours going through it and analyzing and putting the human touch on it. Because yes, I think ChatGPT does a great job analyzing the data, but what it can't do is craft the business plan,
Yeah.
at least from what I've seen. Because I look at a deal different than you might look at a deal. So a deal we're circling right now, if you actually look at the units, they've been renovated, but not up to our standards. So we'll
Mhm.
put a few bucks into the units, but most of our spend is going to be on the amenities and the actual exteriors, because it's such a beautiful asset. It's just, a little dated.
Yeah.
And so another operator might look at that and go, oh, we're going to tear all that stuff out and we're going to do a different renovation package. So you have 60 offers on this deal, which is what they got,
Mhm.
and probably 60 different business plans. So I haven't seen that it can do that yet, right? And so it may get there, but what it can do is at least scan through, the average and median incomes and population growth and just say, hey, this is probably a good area to invest in.
Mhm.
And I've asked it to give me not only the good, but the risks, the challenges, the
Nice.
threats,
Yeah.
all those things. And so once again, it's just that ability. We might get, literally, if I haven't checked my email in an hour and a half, we've been on this podcast. If I looked at it right now, there's probably 10 new deals that got sent to us by brokers
Mhm.
just in that amount of time.
Yeah.
They come in waves, but today's one of those days. I've gotten like 30 of them. And so, we get all of Florida, all of Georgia, and all of the Carolinas. So, I can just quickly drop that information in there. And, our acquisition guy, he runs his own separate process.
Mhm.
So basically when we get together, it's like, hey, I saw this one. He's like, oh, interesting. I saw this one.
Nice.
So, there's a couple different ways we approach it, but that is absolutely a hack that, shaves off hours and hours, which, by the way, if I spend an hour or two on a deal that at the end of that process, we realize it's not a fit, I might've missed an opportunity that was a fit because
That's
I was spending my
exactly
time
it.
in the
Well,
wrong place. Right?
or that you missed something and you made the wrong decision on something too.
That's right.
So
That's
yeah,
it.
no, I love it.
100%.
Love it. Last question. What's your definition of freedom?
Nobody being able to tell me what to do. that would be my definition of freedom. Now, I say that slightly tongue in cheek because I have a business partner, and I owe responsibility to my employees and everybody, because I think that's a two-way street, right? Like, it's not just me barking orders at them. I've got to be there for them and have their back. And we're a small company, so I'm still doing the work, right?
Mhm.
It's not as
Yeah.
if anybody can just sit back and manage from a spreadsheet. Like, I'm analyzing deals. I'm on the phone with investors. Like, we're working every day. But what I say when I mean that is that, for me, for example, my wife and I work very hard. We have no debt. We do not owe anybody a dollar. In my view, and look, I understand that in the United States, to own a home, you more than likely are going to have a mortgage
Mhm.
unless you've been very fortunate in your life. So I don't say this in like a negative way, but my view is that when you owe somebody money, in a sense, you're somewhat of an indentured servant,
Yep.
because guess what?
Absolutely.
If all of a sudden I, decide, what, I don't like this job, I want to change jobs, in the back of my mind going, yeah, but I got to pay my mortgage.
Mhm.
Otherwise they're going to just supremely screw my life up,
Yeah.
for 7 to 10 years.
Yeah.
And so, those types of strategic moves. So for example, like, I bought this house 12 years ago for, I don't mind sharing, for $380,000. And, I've had a lot of success in that period of time. And we did contemplate moving because the, rush of, oh, maybe we go get a new house. And the more I thought about it, it's like, dude, I
But I
just
like
paid this
this
thing
place.
off. Why would I?
It's
I,
like, but I
well,
like
and
this place.
well, and 2 years ago, my son was 18. Guess what? He's
Yeah.
off to college.
Yeah.
My daughter's 16. She'll be off in 2 years. And
Yeah.
so it's
So
like,
you're like, then you're rambling. The two of you are rambling around the house by
yeah.
yourselves. Yeah.
And look, I have friends that, and it goes back to, I'm not saying this is wrong. Everybody's got to live their own life, but they have the biggest, nicest house and they get a
Yep.
new car every 2 or 3 years. And guess what? Every time I talk to them, it's like they're choking,
Yep.
and I'm like,
Yeah.
man, I like the ability. So for me, what freedom looks like is that if I want to take my kids on a 2-week, vacation to Jamaica and
Mhm.
have like full staff on site to cook our meals and take care of us, I can do that.
Yeah.
So that's what freedom looks like to me. So it's not to say I'm skirting responsibility or employees, sorry, you can't tell me what to do, but it's just more, I want to have that option or that choice.
Yeah.
So if something were to change, if I decided, we were talking earlier, if I just want to go buy a house in the mountains and go dig around in the dirt and garden or whatever and write a book, I can do that.
Yeah.
That's freedom in my mind.
That's exactly what I would call Freedom Day. When you've got enough income and you're able to just do whatever you want, whenever you want. So
yeah, that's
awesome.
right, man.
Well, John, thank you for being on the show today. If somebody's interested in learning a little bit about you or connecting with you, what's the best way?
So the best way would be go to ferriscapitalpartners.com. You can book in a time with me to chat or talk or just learn more about what we're up to. I know you'll have my name here in the podcast, but you can search me on LinkedIn. There's probably only one John Makarewicz on LinkedIn. There might be two, but pretty confident there's only one. So you can connect with me there. And whether that's a direct message you send, be happy to jump on a call to talk about leadership or investing, anything like that.
Love it. Thank you, John. I appreciate that. We'll put all that stuff down in the show notes and the description. So everybody will have that along with John's answers to the Fast 5 questions, which he did an awesome job with. So folks, make sure that you subscribe to the channel, no matter where we're at, whether you're watching us or listening to us right now. And we will see you guys back here the very next time.
Awesome.
All in